Well, I'm Doug Wilford, and was a employee of Penton, John Penton, in the beginning at the Honda shop before the beginning of the Penton motorcycle. So I had the ground floor seat to watch all of this develop, and the question came up of how did the Penton motorcycle get the names, the model names. And to my recollection, the 6-day was just, that was a no-brainer because, well, John was in Europe trying to negotiate with the different factories to build the Penton and get the parts for the Penton. It was build it like a 6-day motorcycle. Everything was 6-day, you know.
So that name held great importance in the industry.
They were familiar with the name being that most of the factories' 6-day bikes were only special made. If it was a 6-day bike, it went through a special department and modified, and they used it like a proving ground, some of the companies, for their coming year of their models. But this name 6-day was translated in German, it was grand. It was the best of the best, and this is what John wanted to build. So the 6-day was, it was kind of a no-brainer. I think even the proto model that we got had 6-day on the gas tank. I don't remember right now.
Wow. So we must keep in mind, Doug, of course, that this is more relative to the European market than what we would be necessarily familiar with in the U.S. market. It was more inclined from the European perspective?
Yeah. The U.S., as far as the U.S., the 6 days was just another event in Europe until finally some of the Americans started to go to the 6 days and ride in the 6 days. But even in 1970, when I rode the 6 days in Spain, we had to join the FIM, we had to get a Canadian license. I mean, the American Motorcycle Association wasn't really involved back in the early days. And so the 6-day didn't really mean much as far as quality in the States as it did in Europe. Yeah, that's correct. And then the problem was, okay, we're going to build a 100cc of the same type, you know, the same motorcycle. What do we name that? Well, the next biggest event in that, the best event in that same style of event was the 2-day qualifier in the Berkshires, or the Berkshire Trials. So that's where the 100 got its name, is from the event in Massachusetts. And this carried into the 175 because the next best event, not a trials but enduro, was the 500-mile Jack Pine. So the 175 got the name of the Jack Piner. And we're trying to keep the names of the bikes in relation to events. The Hare Scrambler, I'm not really sure, but it's a word that John started to use for our muddy mud runs, you know, little local scrambles that were just nasty. And they had hare and hounds in California or out in the desert. So the Hare Scramble kind of fit, you know, including the Californians or the Southwest people. It gave them a little more recognition. As far as they were concerned, the Jack Pine and the Berkshire were, you know, they were just East Coast events. But then the 400 came along, and it was a big thing, and we thought, well, the Mint 400 was one of the nicer 2-day desert races, and that's where it got its name, from the Mint.
Well, now, Doug, you know, you mentioned about these names being just brought up. I mean, but was it Mr. Penton, or you guys just sitting around a little discussion?
Well,
or?
Yeah, it's like I mentioned before, that it seems to me everybody that worked at the Honda shop was a Penton employee. And the names, like, what are we going to name it, came up. And then maybe it was after work in the back and everybody's having a beer before they go home, or maybe, you know, I don't remember
Wow.
the exact circumstances, except it seemed like it was a group gathering. Maybe John called us together to have a meeting and say, hey, we need to come up with some names for these motorcycles.
Wow.
And, you know, everybody started hashing around, what do you think of this, what do you think of that? And it went from, you know, naming it the Amherst motorcycle, or you know, the Buckeye, or
Wow.
you know, all kinds of different names got thrown in the hat, and then finally it's like, okay, this kind of flows to go with the names of events, so that's what was basically agreed upon. But I think John had a big hand in naming them, you know, and what he was visioning. So that pretty much takes care of, you know, how we named, or how the name came about. I should say we, I was just another employee. You know.
Just to back up and elaborate a little bit there, again, keeping in mind that for many of us, our perspective is not the same as yours. We simply didn't, you know, weren't fortunate enough to be on the inside as you were, and as a result, you know, we see these small displacement motorcycles having a great importance. Obviously, you know, certainly did very well and stuff, but for Mr. Penton to assign such a grand name as the 6-day to the little 125, I mean, that's really saying something about the capability of a small displacement motorcycle. So obviously he had great confidence very early on.
Well, every time John would go off and ride the 6 days, he'd come back and elaborate on the equipment and the machinery and the ride and the whole bench racing thing, you know. But he always was amazed at the little 50 and 70 cc bikes that were in the 6 days. And that's kind of what threw him towards the Sachs engine more than any of the others. He says, these things, you can't even tell what the engine is. They're so full of mud. But every morning they go out and they give them a kick and they start, and they go buzzing 1,200 miles for 6 days of riding, you know. And they just, every day, these little engines just start up and away they go again, you know. And back then, you couldn't do any major repairs. You couldn't remove a cylinder or a head or any major repairs. They were all safety wired and marked. So it was quite an accomplishment for these factories to have the bikes finished the 6 days.
Yes, I see. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Well, the perspective, I have a hard time sometimes relating, because I was on the inside. And I like to hear other people's views, like your view and a lot of the other members' views of what happened, what was happening. I know what was happening from the inside out, but I don't really know what was happening from the outside in. Ted and I did some extensive traveling, setting up dealers, and you still didn't get the John Q. public. What did he think about this? Until you went to the races and you seen the guys and you let them take a ride, or you know, until you had the hands-on experience. That was our big tool to learn, you know, what they wanted and how they wanted it. John had a real good idea, and we all had an idea because we'd gone through making enduro bikes out of street bikes, and to take a bike out of a box and be ready to race, that was quite an accomplishment. Even Mr. Trunkenpulse didn't think that was possible.
Wow.
To mass produce a 6-day motorcycle, you know, and sell it so that a person could afford it, you know.
So many things that were accomplished in one fell swoop with one first little group of motorcycles basically proved all of that.
Well, from the beginning it was fixed. But we were used to that. That was our operation. When you went out and rode a hare scrambles on Sunday, it might take you 4 days of cleaning and repairing to be ready for the next Sunday. To have a motorcycle that you could ride on Sunday, wash and clean, and put it in the corner and have it ready to ride. Wow, that was